A very good morning to you. Welcome to AM Live this Tuesday. My name is Olive Burrows, and this morning with my all-female panel, we'll be interrogating the trouble with IEBC. This follows the commitment to bipartisan engagement on the reconstitution of the commission by the Azimio and the governing party, that is, or rather governing coalition, Kenya Kwanza. And as we do so, I also see that the Daily Nation from Sunday has been serializing the book written by former IEBC commissioner, his Spilling the Beans, that former commissioner being Isaac Hassan. But before we get into all of that, my name is Olive Burrows, and these are the top stories. The Sacred Girls Mukumu Girls High School in Kakamega has been closed indefinitely following the death of 2 students over what is suspected to be water and food poisoning. Tens of other students who depicted diarrhea and vomiting are hospitalized, with one admitted in the intensive care unit. NTV's Zakias Masamena reports that area leaders are demanding for answers over what they term as negligence by the school administration.
For 1 week now, the Sacred Girls Mukumu High School in Kakamega has been in the headlines following an illness that took the school by surprise. Western Director of Education, Jared Obiero, decided to close down the school following the death of 2 girls, a Form 1 and a Form 2.
We would want our children to learn in a safe and clean environment, and we also would not want them to miss their lessons for a long time. And so we've agreed that we are going to suspend learning for some time.
Although health experts are yet to ascertain what is ailing the girls, preliminary tests point to a bacterial infection.
It is failure of the administration. We have established that the water that is consumed by our children in this school comes from Lake Victoria North Water Company, but it's not always enough. So the school supplements this water by pumping water from a water source, a spring or something, outside the compound.
Hapo kwa hospitali ya Kakamega wakuwe na ward yenye wazazi hawatalipa watoto wao kutibiwa, na hata hapa tuko na Mukumu Hospital. Tunaomba watusaidie wazazi wanapochukua watoto wao.
Some samples were taken to Kemri laboratory for investigations. As at now, we are still waiting for the culture results so that we can establish the root cause, especially getting the medical cause of the situation here.
Last week, the school administration, through school principal Frida Ndolo, dismissed any possibility of food poisoning.
So all those 100 plus students who went to the hospital finally came back. I know I lost 1 student because I had a problem which you are never told. I've lost a student in school. The other students that are being talked of is just like the ones we have called parents to take home. I know that those children who are sick, a good number came from home sick.
One of the students is still admitted at the ICU at the Kakamega Referral Hospital, with 25 others in the general ward.
I've done stool tests, blood tests, and we are generally checking for sepsis or infection, as well as typhoid, amoeba, and those are the tests that we are currently carrying out.
Post-mortem report of one of the students who passed away at the school indicated that the student died of dehydration. Dr. Titus Molongo, who performed the autopsy on the learner, released the report at the Umash Funeral Home in Nakuru, where the deceased body is being preserved.
Dehydration ni ile wakati mtu anapoteza maji kwa mwili. That was very prominent. The other thing is that the stomach contained blood. The stomach contained blood, and the mucosa was also inflamed. And we suspect probably something obnoxious went into the stomach and caused all those havoc. And it is because of that that affection of the stomach because
at night, on Thursday night, she told me she's fine and she's feeling weak, but she was good. We just talked, and then in the morning she just collapsed and just died.
Takis Masame, NTV, Kakamega.
The IEBC selection panel's process of shortlisting new commissioners to the IEBC may be headed for a halt. Sentiments from top Azimio stalwarts indicate that the selection panel's activities may have been overtaken by events following the recent remarks by President William Ruto calling for a bipartisan approach towards the reconstitution of IEBC. And as NTV's Sydney Chazima now reports, Parliament may resort to ad hoc committees that will steer the bipartisan talks between the government and the opposition.
It appears the activities around the reconstitution of the IEBC may be stopped. Sources within the Azimio coalition now intimate that the IEBC selection panel, which is in the process of shortlisting candidates for the positions of chair and commissioners to the electoral body, has been overtaken by the recent political developments initiated by President Ruto and Azimio leader Raila Odinga. But according to constitutional lawyer Bobby Mkangi, the selection panel, which was gazetted into office by President William Ruto, enjoys a constitutional mandate, hence is shielded from any arbitrary action. And while the politics around the IEBC selection panel simmers, President Ruto has already set the ball rolling towards the bipartisan talks, meeting with Kenya Kwanza allied leaders of both houses of parliament at State House on Monday.
The bipartisan approach, in my view, would include probably an ad hoc committee, since there is no standing committee that would look at many of the issues.
In order to accommodate Odinga's demand for non-parliamentary experts to the bipartisan committee, Parliament will have to amend its standing orders.
The establishment of any ad hoc or select committee in Parliament, again, is guided by the standing orders. And therefore, it will not be a question of what Kimani Ichung'wah wants or doesn't want, or the other leader wants or another one doesn't want.
Ichung'wah, who has been touted as one of the hardliners during the calls for dialogue between Ruto and Raila, maintains that the bipartisan talks will not yield another handshake.
I can confirm the president has not even met with Raila Odinga. He has not even spoken to Raila Odinga, leave alone meeting, leave alone a handshake. Therefore, there is nothing touching on a handshake. The bipartisan approach is an approach that looks at the interest of the country over and above the partisan interest.
The Azimio anti-government demonstrations were anchored on several demands, among them lowering the cost of living. But there are murmurs from the public that political matters, heavy with interest of the political class, may have taken center stage, leaving out the common mwananchi.
Sasa unajua ukiniuliza hivyo ndugu yangu, unanitia mashakani na wenzangu, kwa sababu unaniambia niseme yale mambo partisan sasa. Na nikikwambia, and now I'll tell you this, sitting where I sit as a leader of majority on the Kenya Kwanza side, that it is true the cost of living is high. Therefore, if you ask me whether we have shifted from our focus from the people-centric issues, I'll tell you, when the president says that government focuses on the economic transformation agenda, that economic transformation agenda is basically to deal with the cost of living.
Parliament, which is on short recess until next week, may be recalled to expedite the process of setting up a committee for the bipartisan talks. Sydney Chazima, NTV.
The Director of Public Prosecutions has embarked on the process of dropping cases against those arraigned in relation to mass protests in the last 2 weeks. The prosecution on Monday withdrew cases against 8 Azimio la Umoja Alliance leaders, including Minority Leader Opiyo Wandayi, on grounds that the decision was to allow for peace and dialogue to take place. Here is NTV's Brian Mushiri with the details.
I thought you were just asking.
On Monday, the prosecution before Senior Principal Magistrate Boaz Ombewa dropped the case against Unguja MP Opiyo Wandayi, Senator Stuart Madzayo, Richard Chonga of Kilifi South, Amina Laura of Malindi, George Yogo and Esther Orimi. The DPP told the court the decision was to allow for peace and dialogue to take place.
The accused persons are discharged under Section 87A of the CPC, cash bail to be refunded to the depositors.
Defense lawyer Danstan Omari welcomed the move by the DPP to drop the charges and requested that cases against more than 200 protesters also be dropped.
Let nobody take that the DPP is taking directions from anybody. Let nobody say that the DPP is playing into the politics. The politics are completely different. Had not even this political truth been there, one Nuruddin Haji could have simply terminated this matter.
The court allowed the withdrawal of the files by the Director of Public Prosecutions. The release of the leaders comes after opposition leader Raila Odinga called for an end to the anti-government protests. Odinga also asked the state to drop cases against Azimio leaders and supporters.
We ask that all arrests and prosecutions related to our demonstrations be stopped with immediate effect.
The accused were arrested on the 20th of March at 10 a.m. along City Hall Way, Nairobi. Brian Mushiri, NTV, Nairobi.
On the other side of the door, and we'll be walking into studio shortly. So we begin with the Daily Nation, given we are at the Nation Center. Front page story is this one: search for Ruto-Raila deal starts. And they have something inset there, and it reads, President William Ruto on Sunday extended an olive branch to Azimio leader Raila Odinga, who called off the protests. What is the roadmap is that question that Sydney Chazima attempted to answer with his report, and given that interview with the majority leader Kimani Ichung'wah a day after Azimio chief Raila Odinga called off anti-government protests in response to President William Ruto's offer for consensus in the recruitment of poll commissioners. The two sides hit the ground running as they met separately to pick representatives to the team that will formulate terms of engagement. I'll be showing you some of those pictures of their Twitter handles. Also on the front page of the Daily Nation, book serialization. As I mentioned, this began on Sunday, the day, and today the revelation is this: the day I almost sacked Oswago. Former IEBC chairman Isaac Hassan reveals how former CEO James Oswago and his personal assistant led a media campaign to cast aspersions on the integrity of commissioners while raising his profile as the main person behind the success of the electoral body. He reveals how then Prime Minister Raila Odinga intervened to save Mr. Oswago from the sack. And they tell us more on pages 2, 3 and 10. Also on the front page, Kenya's debt up on weak shilling. The weakening of the shilling has increased Kenya's foreign currency debts by at least 350 billion shillings since the start of this year alone, as the local currency yesterday stayed at a historic low of 132.52 shillings against the greenback. More on that on the back page of the Daily Nation. I see here they explain that a weak local currency means Kenya requires more shillings to pay for the same amount of debt. By end of December 2022, Kenya's public debt was at 9.17 trillion shillings, out of which 4.7 trillion shillings constituted external public debt. That is about 51.2%. And they have what, a table on the back page also depicting the currency, the debt stock by December 2022, and on it goes. Kenya's public and publicly guaranteed external debt is denominated in various currencies. Okay, so, and then at the very top of the Daily Nation here, sadly, death of 2 students sparks fears over safety in school. Sacred Heart Mukumu Girls High School in Kakamega was yesterday closed for the remainder of the term following an outbreak of a yet-to-be-disclosed disease that has killed 2 students and left several girls hospitalized. That report was submitted to us by Zacchaeus Mwasame. And I see here, Healthy Nation struggles for our pandemic babies. Mothers who gave birth during lockdown cite delayed milestones for their young ones. Interesting read that in the Healthy Nation. And I also see here space race. Kenya set to send its first satellite to space. The satellite will be launched into space by the Falcon 9 rocket owned by Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, SpaceX, next Tuesday from Vandenberg base in California in the US of A. All right, front page of Taifa Leo. This is their headline. Wanaohofia handshake and identify highlighted there. Professor Winnie Mitula is laughing. I mean, Taifa Leo headlines are always something to enjoy. And this is highlighted on the front page. Kimani Ichung'wah, Ndindi Nyoro, Evans Kidero, Kalonzo Musyoka. And on either side of them is R. Musalia Mudavadi and the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua. It reads, Gachagua na mashaka kuhusu kujirudia kwa masaibu yaliyompata Ruto chini ya Uhuru baada ya mapatano ya mwaka 2018, huku waasi wa ODM Nyanza kama vile Kidero na Owalo wakiogopa kupoteza usemi waliokuwa wameanza kupata. Kwa upande mwingine, Kalonzo na yamkini Karua wana wasiwasi wa kupoteza umaarufu wa kisiasa waliokuwa wameanza kujijengea kwa kukosoa serikali. So more on that on ukurasa wa pili of the Taifa Leo. And vilio serikali ikisita kutoa hela za county, magavana walia kutopokea mgao wao tangu Disemba mwaka wa 2022. And then Afrika tukateni ushoga, ahimiza Rais Museveni. All right, that is the front page. They also have that story on Mukumu girls, maswali magumu baada ya vifo 2 shuleni Mukumu, gonjwa hatari la misuli kujikaza. And then they have sports news on the front page as well. The Standard now, before I ask my panelists to comment on that, whether those persons highlighted on the front page of the Taifa Leo have anything to worry about given Kenya's history, or rather the last administration's history. Hope after demo deal, after incessant pressure both locally and internationally, President William Ruto and Azimio leader Raila Odinga climbed down from their positions and agreed to dialogue, a move that has been received with jubilation across the country, with traders, church leaders and politicians hoping for lasting solutions. A section of civil society groups have said this process the bipartisan process needs to extend beyond the two parties. They've insisted that others such as themselves, the CSOs, religious leaders, etc., should have a seat at the table. We'll get into that in the course of the next till 8 a.m. And I see here business community Lord's peace gesture looks to recoup losses made during the demonstrations with the hope issues will be ironed out. DPP drops cases against politicians police had lined up for prosecutions over violence and property destruction. President convened meeting of government leadership in Parliament to brief them on the goings-on and kickstart the formation of the bipartisan committee. Church leaders and U.S. Senator Andrew Coons believed to have played the central role that got the two leaders talking. So this is the spread on the front page of the Standard. I see they've also highlighted Mukumu girls closed after 2 die of cholera. Kenyans reduce fuel power use after prices soared and scramble for dominance in school games. That is in the sports pages. And internationally, Trump gears up for tough court battle. Star now, and similar headlines across the dailies, if I've read correctly, and I have. Ruto ICC threat forced Raila to call off demos. President refused to meet opposition leaders to discuss power sharing. More on this on page 6, and we will get into that. But first, let me invite my panelists to weigh in on the events surrounding the two leaders that have been highlighted across the dailies. That is Raila Odinga, President William Ruto. What do you make of this commitment to approach the reconstitution of the IEBC through a bipartisan process, and that is through Parliament? I'll start with you, Ogla.
I think first I want to really appreciate the two leaders for taking the responsibility to stop the violence that was happening, or even the demonstration that was happening. They demonstrated clearly their love for this country, And I know it was a prayer for everybody. So I'll continue to be very grateful to President William Ruto and to former Prime Minister Raila Odinga for what they did. Yesterday, all Kenyans were afraid to do anything, even to leave their houses. But we thank God that by morning, we had a nation. And we were not again put into that pain of seeing a child dying in a house in Kibera, a very painful scene. A very innocent child that just died, who could have been maybe the next president or another big leader in this country. So I'm very grateful for that. As for the decision to have a bipartisan talk, I think, again, they have done, for me, a very noble thing, because they returned this discussion to their people representatives. Parliament was elected to represent the people of Kenya. And many times when we have some of these problems, we've always said we wish the Parliament were given room to interrogate these matters or some of the matters before they are taken over outside. And so to take it to Parliament to discuss the way forward, for me, again, is another good decision that the two leaders have made.
Okay, Professor Winnie Mitula, good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
What did you make of the development? The president held a press conference on Sunday evening. On Sunday night, Raila Odinga said he has received the olive branch with grace and called off the demonstrations for the period of a week to see how these bipartisan engagements shape up. What's your opinion?
Well, it was a relief to the nation because a lot of people were very worried about Kenya because there was tension, and this tension was not just restricted to politicians who were actually the ones fighting, but everybody else. So to that extent, there was a lot of relief. When you look at the aspect of, it's a dispute, because it's a dispute which is now taken back to where it should belong probably, but I also question whether when you have such a dispute, if you take it to the mainstream committee of parliament or so, no, but if you create a new mechanism like the IPPG, which we remember very well, that was again born out of a dispute and a desire to put something that would take us to the next level. So it's a measure, yes, and one would look, considering how parliament is today, its constitution and the many wavy people in it who are moving from whichever direction, we still can't quite rejoice. We just hope that they'll be objective and rational, because if they are not objective and rational in whatever they want to resolve, I don't see them coming up with any new outcome now that we have taken it back to following the law, following the constitution, which I respect, and I'm glad we have a lawyer here who will help us out, because yes, you can go the legal way, but the legal way sometimes also doesn't work when the disputes are of this kind of nature. So I'm watching to see the mechanism that they'll put that will make it work to resolve where we find ourselves now, so that at least we can agree, especially the contention over the panel. Which is already moving anyway. It's a very complex issue, actually, which I don't think legal will resolve. It will be a lot of give and take.
Okay. Your response, Mariam Vaneka?
Thank you very much, Olive, for inviting me here today and my panelists. So I think first and foremost, it was a very good move by the president to change the tone at the top. It's very, very important. For once, we saw a situation where the country came first, and the quick response by the Right Honorable Raila was also very instructive to show that it's not about their interests, it's about the country. And I believe everyone on either side, especially the hardliners, needs to take a cue from the president and from Raila Odinga, because it's very important to remember that in any political contest, whatever the outcome, and in such a contested election, very, very hot election, where the umpire also came under the glare, of scrutiny, it leaves a lot of questions in Kenyans' minds. And so their supporters obviously took very hardline positions. You have the one side that says we won, take it or leave it, live with it. You have the other side that says they're not satisfied, and we take the conversation back to the streets. And you've seen what that has done, and it's been building up. And so very hardline positions taken, bringing the country to, you know, a crescendo of tension and animosity. But be that as it may, the instructive word here is bipartisan approach. And I like what you said in your tweet yesterday, that you're going to be taking a bipartisan approach to this discussion. But it's always good to remember that Kenyans have a lot of faith in the Constitution, in the law. Actually, whenever we see political contests, at the back of our minds, we always know that we will be fine because the law is there for us. But now you have a situation here that Professor Winnie is talking about, that she doesn't know whether the law is actually going to be the cure. And that's a very important point, because the law is actually created by a political process. Mm-hmm. So it takes a lot of statesmanship for the president and Raila to talk about the bipartisan approach, and I believe that's where the answer actually lies. Okay. Yes. I'm hearing a lot of cautious optimism in line or backing the Standard front page, which talks about how this news was received with jubilation across the country. They've listed traders, church leaders, and politicians hoping for long-lasting. I think that's the key, right? A long-lasting solution. How do we not find ourselves the next election cycle back where we are now? Florence, yes. Was it inevitable in your view?
Yes. I mean, the last time I was here, it was the day after the first one. And I was saying, you know, this thing would have ended at 10 a.m. if only somebody would have been a bigger person, or would have allowed the demonstration to end. They give their petition. Maybe we would be having these discussions that started on Sunday. They would have started on Tuesday, 21st. But nevertheless, it has taken us, it reminds me of, I don't know if you used to write a lot of inshas, but I used to do. There was this one, we were told one day to write an insha of amani haiji ila kwa incha ya upanga. Like, it seems in this country we have to fight a bit for us to get some breakthrough. We never just get breakthroughs. We really just have to fight a bit for somebody to say, oh, okay, fine, now let's talk. Because we didn't need to get here. But nevertheless, we're here. I was happy. It also happened on a Sunday, on the day of the Lord, where we had prayed so much for peace in this country. So looking forward to the conversations, the bipartisanism. But for me, sitting here as a woman, I am asking, there are things that took people to the streets beyond IEBC. So as they discuss, let them not forget that unga is important. Let them not forget that, you know, foodstuffs are quite expensive and the cost of living is quite high. And therefore, you know, as the political elite, you might end up discussing IEBC and discussing every other thing and forgetting Mwananchi. So let's not forget Mwananchi in this particular conversation. It is critical. It is critical. Yes, yes. In fact, CRECO, I did mention that a section of civil society organizations did tweet a statement yesterday. I will pull it up, but the Institute for Social Accountability and all those who were involved in there saying we can't forget these other issues, just like you're saying, cost of living in particular. And now, as I pull up that statement, Ogla, I'm curious what you make of this headline, and that is Taifa Leo's headline. I saw Professor Winnie Mitula chuckle a little bit. Wanahofia handisheki, and those who have been... Yes, yes. You know, you said you used to write in shadow. Yes, because I don't get that one. I used to write very good inshas. I don't see that one.
Oh, Gopa.
No, it's not shake.
Well, it's colloquial, right?
That is shake.
Language is a living, breathing thing. It grows with the times. Wogopa ushirikiano wa kikazi baina ya Ruto na Raila huenda ukazimia nyota zao za kisiasa. And so these are the gentlemen who've been highlighted by the Taifa Leo in that regard. Do you agree with the headline that these gentlemen have the most to lose should Raila Odinga, William Ruto strike some sort of arrangement?
Who has to lose?
Yes, those ones.
I'm looking forward to
Rigathi Gachagua, Kimani Ichung'wah, Evans Kidero, Ndindi Nyoro, Kalonzo Musyoka, Musalia Mudavadi. And the reason Kidero is here, so the article talks about Kidero Owalo now have some sort of footing in Nyanza, right? So they're afraid they will lose that voice.
I'm looking forward.
That's the view here. And then, of course, Kimani Ichung'wah, Ndindi Nyoro, DP Rigathi Gachagua, who have really been hardliners, as you referred, Maria, also stand to lose a lot. Musalia Mudavadi thrown in there for good measure. Your view, Ogla?
Yeah, newspapers and the media sometimes, and Kenyans make their opinions. Sometimes they can be a little sensational. Both the Right Honorable Raila Odinga and the President, William Ruto, have said it very clearly that they are not interested in handshake or forming a coalition government. What they have said is they want to have a bipartisan discussion to see how they can resolve the reasons that were of contention. One of it, of course, seems to be number one is now has become IEBC. Before then, it was food. In the streets, we were seeing more of sufurias, and we were seeing more of the elections. But now we are hearing it's becoming the number one has become IEBC. But I just want to pick up on what Professor talked about the law, and I know my sister, the lawyer, has told us, which is one of the problems I sometimes think we have in this country, because as a Christian, I always remember the scripture that Jesus said, I did not come really to destroy the law, but I came to fulfill it. But there are some things that are not solved by the law. You know, there is law even in parenting. But we cannot in the house say, the law of Kenya says, child, you must do this. There is a way in which we must bring humanity, we must bring character, we must bring other faculties of livelihood into our decision making. But when we make every decision based on the law sometimes can be so external and so detached, so that you will only be like doing, following some rule that your heart is not into it. And good leadership comes from deep within the person. It is a heart that leads. It is what you value that will lead the nation. So I want to believe that, and I want to pray that this time round in Kenya, even as our MPs, I have no problem with MPs making these decisions. After all, they are the ones who really interact with these matters every day. When they go home, before they enter the house, then all the neighbors and the voters will be coming for food before they ask how the elections were and are not good. So I believe that the parliamentarians can bring for us a solution. After all, they contested and we elected them to be leaders. They will give us a good solution for everything, for IEBC, for the food, for everything that we have a problem now. I believe they will. The challenge that we have is, can we let them look at the broader spectrum of this matter and not just tell us the law says, the law says, the law says. That's my view. But I don't think anybody is going to lose his job. Okay. I'm not afraid of anybody losing his job. Yeah.
All right, Professor Michula, what do you make of the the handy shaky?
Handy shaky.
It
is a power play. The entire thing where we find ourselves is a power play. And maybe for this, I will not use the word power, because power sometimes pushes politicians to think otherwise. Space. It will all depend on how this discussion, you know, it's a first step. We can talk about bipartisan in handling the IEBC case, but that's just one. I think the issues are many that are being played around on the power table. So if those interplays continue, and then spaces change, and spaces can change, you know, that's what is implied in that Kiswahili and the shaky thing, because spaces can change. We did see spaces change during Katenusu. We did see spaces change during handshake. So spaces can change depending on how the politicians decide to resolve things. Because usually when there is a contention between two key political parties that are very, very competitive, I remember being in the media, I think in an Australian media, just during when we were counting votes. And I told that media that it is so competitive that I can't tell you who is likely to win. Any of them could win. So when there is such a discourse in terms of a power play, then there is also likely to be embers after people have won. So really, even whether it's Ruto who could have lost, we would have been seeing what we are seeing. So the issue is there has to be some talk, post-talk, somehow. Even if they were not going to street, you still have to care about your other opponent who has 6 million people behind them, right? So depending on how they will decide. For now, I don't know how. We saw yesterday a team of Kwanza, Ruto with his team, which was very good.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll see the others.
Their parliamentary leadership.
Yes, yes. So we will see the other. And we also know that these are people who have held their own. Some have very hard stance, some have soft stance. So there is going to be a lot of give and take in those two teams. Because I'm sure there are people who will be arguing that this was already resolved. It went to Parliament, it went to Senate, it was deal done. What are we doing again? So it is going, and that's why I say you can't talk of legal. You have to also look at what Olga is saying. You have to look at the non-legal, because otherwise the power play there could displace people. Depending on how they decide the handshake that is being talked about there can displace so many of those people, depending on how they resolve to go ahead beyond those committees.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Maria, what do you think? Given, you know, they say once bitten, twice shy. Given William Ruto's experience, 2018 moving forward following the famed handshake, you know, do they have reason to be jittery? That being Rigathi Gachagua, who is now in the role of Deputy President, Musalia Mudavadi, who is a Prime Cabinet Secretary, and the lot of them.
You know, you've actually hit the point, Olive, because none of these people is jobless as we speak. Perhaps only Kalonzo Musyoka is not formally employed, but I mean, he's a senior lawyer in this country. So none of those people are struggling to buy unga or fuel their cars or move from place to place. These are comfortable people. And it just brings back the conversation to what is it that we focus on in this country? Why do we focus on political figures as the ones who set the agenda for this country? You've seen Kenyans on the street, and it's been organic. And with each growing demonstration, you've seen huge number of people coming out for whatever reason. Most of them were actually you know, protesting about the food prices, fuel prices, which means, you know, when there's an increase in fuel, everything changes. So those key issues should not be lost on anybody sitting at the discussion table on behalf of Kenyans. So whether it is a handshake, whether it is a bipartisan approach, whether it is a purely legal approach, whether it's a purely political solution, at the end of the day, these people are holding office or are bound to hold, because I know Kidero has been nominated to be a CAS in this country and was sworn in, but they have been told by the courts not to assume office. They are there courtesy of the people of Kenya, and that should never ever be lost. They are earning a salary from the exchequer. That is a fact. So at the end of the day, none of these people's salaries will change. None of these people's economic situation will be that dire that they will actually need to go begging, so to speak. So the handshake, the way it has been fashioned in that headline, is really sensational, and it's going to lose focus on the real issue. And we do not want a situation where the narrative that is being driven is the same one that was driven when the BBI, Building Bridges Initiative, was initiated. Because what happened with that process, it was hijacked by the politics of the day. It became the rallying call by, you know, the team that went to the streets and said the BBI is about political positions and it's not about the Mwananchi. At the end of the day, you still have people asking, what about the other components of the BBI? So this particular situation that we find ourselves in has not been brought about because of positions. It's been brought about because Kenyans have actually taken to the streets, a big number that you cannot ignore, to say they are not happy with the state of the economy, they are not happy with the food prices that keep skyrocketing, they are not happy with the school fees that they have to pay for the kids that are going back to school, and many other factors. That should never be lost.
And what I'm hearing from you is, yeah, it shouldn't get lost in all of this political clamor.
Yeah.
Ogla and you, Maria, appear to agree that the headline is sensational.
Yes.
Finally, on this particular headline, Florence, your views.
You had asked who is going to lose, and you had put some faces there.
Let me pull them up for you. I was just pulling up that image of the parliamentary leadership. Yes, but here are the faces. Here are the faces.
Please show me the faces.
Yeah.
Now, for me, just like Maria has said, and I said it in the beginning, let's not forget what is critical. The elitists, political elitists will discuss and finish whatever they want to finish, but let's not bury our heads in the sand around the cost of living for Kenyans. That is there, and that is something that needs to be addressed. For the grandstanders, I mean, the people who are chest thumping and people who are saying, no, you can't, and the fear-mongering around the handshake. I remember I also said here, I said, okay,
the shareholder.
Remove the thought of if somebody is coming to negotiate or discuss, then say in this discussion, we're not discussing handshake. This is what we're discussing. And what is this big fear of people shaking hands? In the African society, people shake hands to make peace, isn't it? And so I think we've just blown this out of proportion, because remember, after the 2007, when we almost buried ourselves, something had to give. And for me, leadership means something has to give. It doesn't matter whether you're in opposition or you're in government. This country belongs to all of us. And all of us is not the politicians only. All of us includes the wananchi and the women. The women are suffering most right now because if I cannot put food on the table, the children will be asking me. And so for me, let's not forget that. So for these ones, I pray that what they lose is their grandstandingness. Let them lose that part. If they were chest thumping, I hope we get a humble breed of politicians. A breed of politicians who care about the nation. A breed of politicians who are not just saying, I'm in power or I'm in this, but people who are like, wait a minute, what about the people? So if this is going to, if there's a handshake then, if it's going to solve to tame the embers of grandstandingness, I'll be very happy, and I'd pray that they lose the grandstandingness in their system of politics, so that we have a more sober nation, where when we have an issue, we're actually able to deal and resolve without feeling, I have won, you have lost. No. Yeah.
Okay. All right, in Kenya, when you talk about the handshake, also remember the one between Kibaki and Raila Odinga. Yes. In Kenya, the handshake is of political significance. It's not just an innocuous greeting. Yeah. So we need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll get more into, because essentially we've already delved in the topic of conversation, and we'll get more into that, which is the trouble with IEBC. How do we bridge that trust deficit? And also, I'm curious whether your assessment of this headline on the Star is similar to your assessment of the one of Taifa Leo. Their headline is this: Ruto ICC threat forced Raila to call off demos. I know we've talked about the pressure that was exerted by the international community, the face of which was Senator Coons. We'll get into that on the other side of this break. All right, welcome back to AM Live, and I did promise that when we come back we'd look at this Star headline quickly and then quickly transition into the trust deficit that exists around the IEBC. So their headline is this: Ruto ICC threat forced Raila to call off demos. They tell us to refer to page 6 and 3, 4. And actually, I'll stop by the editorial cartoon later. It's quite interesting. So here's the report: how Ruto no handshake stand, threat of ICC, forced ceasefire. Sources say government declined call for a direct round-table discussion with Raila. And details emerged yesterday of how President William Ruto reached a truce with opposition leaders led by Raila Odinga. Church leaders, especially Catholic bishops, led other emissaries in brokering the, quote, ceasefire announced on Sunday evening. The Star has learned the government according to the sources, totally declined the call for a direct roundtable discussion with Raila on any of the Azimio leaders. President Ruto was adamant that his leadership is founded on the bottom-up approach as represented in Parliament and the Kenya Kwanza Alliance partners. And Aide said this meant he would not be pulled into a one-on-one discussion on national issues with an individual. Interesting. On Sunday, Ruto asked Raila, and we have the details of that. Western diplomats, they tell us, also piled pressure on the opposition when they issued a joint confidential statement responding to Raila's attacks. And the diplomats made it clear they did not support or agree in the opposition's activities and reasons for calling for demonstrations as they fell below the threshold of any political standard. So do you, in your view, ladies, I'll start with you, Ogla, and I'm seeing the paragraph here. During the shuttle diplomacy, Azimio was confronted with an already drafted petition calling for the International Criminal Court intervention, while the bishops mounted pressure on the opposition by insisting that, quote, as the architects of the demos, Azimio was directly responsible for the outcomes. Do you think this was a consideration in both leaders standing down?
I don't know what to say about that matter because my concern is different. My concern is that Kenya has been independent for many years, way more than 50 years, that a human being should be considered mature. And it is actually not good that at such an age in life, the international community or the next door neighbor is still having a lot of authority over this house or this family called Kenya. So this speaks slowly about our leadership. It's not good that we always put ourselves in situations where outsiders have to decide or to determine what needs to happen in our country. We should be mature enough to be able to know that this is the far I can reach, even in demanding what I need to demand. So we thank God for courts like ICC because then they help the world, but we shouldn't be feeling very nice about referring our situation in Kenya to ICC. It doesn't talk well of us. We should be able to manage our issues. They say in early marriages, people can still talk about their issues with outsiders, but as people grow, people should be able to be grounded and manage their problems. So ICC or not ICC is not my issue now. It shouldn't even be a threat. What should be the threat is the people of Kenya, the livelihoods of the people of Kenya, the children going to school, parents being able to pay fees, you know, people being able to provide for their families and not fearing that tomorrow their families may go without food or may go without education. That should be a serious threat, more than ICC. Okay.
Is this something they should be concerned about, Professor Mitula?
They should, because you see, the globe, we are a country and we love ourselves, but when we fail, and I like her point, that if we should not, she's arguing we should not allow ourselves for others to come in. So others come in when we fail. So every time we start messing around like we are doing now, and we do every other elections, we end up in a mess that if left alone, we would kill ourselves. So the best way is another outsider. In alternative dispute resolution, always you have somebody else coming in. So it could be an embassy from some mission, it could be some elders, it could be church. Everybody was trying, as you saw, to extend their hands. On the other hand, there were those who were saying we don't need outsiders to intervene. Like Azimio was saying, we don't need outsiders. But I would argue otherwise. When you start getting into a situation like we saw those three, people getting out there into protest, you reached a stage where you don't need the politicians alone. They were not going to help us. Not Kwanza, not Azimio. We needed the church, we needed rational individuals, even citizens, we needed elders, we needed embassies, and we can need ICC, because ICC was just put there to backstop, a truant kind of government, so, very autocratic governments that can almost kill and bury their own. So there are reasons to always check out. As to whether this was the main threat, I would say is one of them. Because we've had an experience, and we saw how hard it was for Uhuru and Ruto when they were all facing ICC and they had won again. So here you have the glory of power, and at the same time you are facing a court. Uhuru had to give government away and say, I'm going to the court. Very difficult thing. But I know politicians, these kind of things don't restrain them much. I don't think this would be a bigger variable in a politician's life. They are ready to die for the things they are looking for.
All right. Maria, what are your thoughts?
I think this is one of the threats. And I should just say here that if you look at the way this situation developed and it was ratcheting up, you had a situation where there was excessive use of force by the police. That is excessive use of, police ammunition, tear gassing, journalists in a car. I mean, some of the things we saw, even people ended up dying. And the official number that we have so far is 3. I tend to think it might be more. You had a situation where property was looted. You have a situation where infrastructure was destroyed. So now, when you have excessive use of force by the police, remember the ICC is a double-edged sword. It just doesn't target one protagonist. It targets everybody across the line. And I think that's what people hardly ever think about. And the fact that you have to dangle the ICC sword speaks volumes, because we've been there. We've been at the brink. I keep hearing people say we've been at the brink. But we actually lost quite a bit in 2007. Lives were lost. People were displaced. Up to now, there are people who've never recovered from that trauma and live with the consequences. And you see some of the decisions that are made out of fear. For fear of being killed by your neighbor, or for fear of being jailed at the ICC. Because I'm surprised that Winnie is saying that politicians they're willing to die for some of these causes. But I don't think that's really the truth. The fact of the matter is that politics is about interests, and it's about gaining power. But what should not be lost to Kenyans is that it cannot be at any cost. And so the fact that we have to revert back to the law and the consequences of the law, for me, is a good thing. The fact that there was intervention by people outside of government speaks a lot to our maturity as a country and the need for us to put the country first. So the dispute resolution mechanism that was deployed here by church leaders, by elders, and even politicians or people in the political space is a very good thing, so that we resolve the issue internally before going the international way, which of course is a loss to us as a country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Florence, do you think there was that push to pull back on either side, that feeling that, hey, okay, the way things are going, because Maria said things were ratcheting up, so that pull back, in part, do you agree that it could have been informed by this threat?
No, I think for me, the fact that I saw police every week, becoming more aggressive than before, that scared me a bit. And that, for me, is what I felt pointed to ICC, not even the rallies themselves or all that. I just thought that excessive use of force on unarmed civilians, that was going to get us to a very bad place, because it was going to pit Mwananchi with the person who's supposed to be protecting them. And that was going to go south. And so it is one of the reasons, I hope, that not just ICC, but the way things were being handled, it was going to be a war against those with arms and those without arms. And that was not going to be a good thing. So I'm happy that even if that was in the back of their mind, or if it is one of the reasons that made them sit down, then so be it. But bottom line, we shouldn't forget the fact that we as a country, and I remember just asking somebody when I was saying, the church needs to rise up, and somebody was saying, no, but we don't trust the church anymore, because the church divided us already during election. So you're getting a populace, which, first of all, before we used to rely on the church, we are now struggling to rely on the church. And I hope that at this particular moment, church will, as we know it, will redeem itself and be the bigger person all the time, so that we don't take you know, positions as churches. And so, yes, ICC could have been one of the reasons, but also where we were heading was not a very good place. So it is good that we are actually sitting down and talking. And if the Catholic Church is the one that pulled this through, then I commend them for doing that, because we needed that, both internal and external. But I'm more inclined to internal than external, because I want to be proud when I travel out of this country.
And you know, essentially the only way the ICC could come in is if our internal mechanism totally failed or collapsed. And speaking of politicians being willing to die, maybe we could argue that they're willing to put other people's lives on the line for their cause. But now let's get substantively into the topic this morning. We've touched on it in our perusal of the dailies, but the topic of conversation again today is the trouble with IEBC. How do we bridge that trust deficit? There was a proposal made, or a response to the bipartisan approach in Parliament within the law that the President spoke of, and several CSOs, I see here the Kenya Human Rights Commission, CRECO, Muhuri, TISA, Haki Yetu, Inform Action, issued this statement, and I'm going to scroll to the recommendations, or rather their demands. And they say, one, the government must urgently come up with a pro-poor and rights-based framework to deal with the high cost of living, to realize the economic and social rights aspirations outlined under Article 43 of the Constitution. We call on critical officers, among them the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, to investigate the conduct of the police, political class, and civilians that is against the rule of law, and political and civilians that is against the rule of law during the demonstrations, and take requisite legal action. We urge, this one they've bold and capsed, the police and citizens to act within the law. As a democratic country, Kenya values the right to freedom of expression, assembly, and association as guaranteed in the Constitution, and any attempts, which they've again bolded and all capped, attempts to claw back the gains made will be resisted vehemently. The liberalization and indigenization of the media industry have grown full circle and bolstered our democracy, and as such, media must be allowed to operate freely and without fear of intimidation, reprisal, and violence. This is where I was getting now, which is the last proposal, which is the bipartisan parliamentary approach to address outstanding electoral issues must take a multi-sectoral approach and ensure inclusivity and comprehensive resolution of historical and emerging governance issues bedeviling the country, be opened up to other critical players, including civil society actors, professional associations, faith-based organizations, student leadership, private sector, trade unions, media, and other civic formations. The latest developments on the state of the nation present an opportunity for the nation to transform, and it goes on and on. I know, Ogla, you said you have every confidence in our parliament to resolve this issue, at least as far as the composition of IEBC is concerned. But what do you make of what they're suggesting? Is it possible to have a parallel process involving these other actors, or do we take the entire process out of parliament and do Bomas of Kenya style? Because there are several issues which have been raised here beyond the composition of the IEBC. You talked of the sufurias that were out during the demonstrations.
Thank you. I always believe that the way to solve a problem is to understand the foundation or the historical context. We all know that the term of the former IEBC had come to an end. And so it is time, or it was time a month ago, that we select or we hire new IEBC commissioners constitutionally. We all also know that when the formation of this selection panel was happening, all the sectors that had been asked to send representatives participated. But the Azimio said they declined for reasons that they said they do not have a trust in the process. Now, in that time, if we all remember, the PSC actually went out of its way to advertise for the position, that position that was left for the Azimio team. And they did interviews. I don't know whether they got one or two, I may not remember, but I know they did interviews, and they were looking for a person that would be aligned to the Azimio to join the selection panel. They were trying to find a way so that they will have an all-inclusive panel. And because all that went into place, I believe that parliamentarians will sit and look at the process. They will also look at the individuals that are in that selection panel. I don't know why I have this faith that they may not change that panel, because that panel is fully representative. And the religious organization gave their people, Parliament gave representatives, the Law Society gave representatives. I don't know which other organ gave representatives. The issue is, which angel are we looking for, by the way? Which angel are we looking for to go and do that which we want to do? The trust that we are looking for in Kenya is on individuals who have confidence in their integrity and who will do their job. We are not going, even if we tell the politicians, everybody give you a person, whether it was a blood relations or a person that they trust. Do you know, let us face this reality. Of all the IEBC commissioners that we have had in Kenya, do you know most of them were seconded or given by politicians? But a time comes when we still, the same politicians, not wananchi, will still mistrust them. And we still say, oh, that one has been hired or bought by the other side. Or let us just believe that parliamentarians will come up, this bipartisan team of both Azimio and Kenya Kwanza parliamentarians will look at this issue in a very objective way. And I tend to believe that in the same way, if a minister or anybody was going to lose their job, it will be because they have not performed, not because of handshake. So even this commission, even this selection panel, I strongly believe they will be allowed to continue, because they are Kenyans that represent this country, and they are qualified Kenyans. In fact, the chairperson represents the religious organization, and it is the same church which truly, many of us have complained that they lost their saltiness in the last election because they became bipartisan, but they are still the same church that have come now to help us bring truth. So if we have a person representing the church being the chairperson of a selection panel, what do you think parliamentarians will say? Will they say we remove, then we have a person representing Azimio or Kenya Kwanza being the chairperson of the selection panel? No. I believe they are going to have a discussion and they are going to support the selection panel. Maybe they will change some of the rules. I don't know. I don't know what would be there, but I tend to think they will not have a problem with that selection panel.
All right. And I'll leave that question to Maria, the question of we already have a selection panel in place. President William Ruto, before his concession on Sunday, had repeatedly stated that this law was drafted when we had the handshake partnership, and therefore there is legislation in place to guide the process. So what happens now that we have been told there will be a bipartisan approach to the reconstitution of IEBC? What does that mean for the selection panel, given I read it was about 900, just shy of 900 applications for the 6 vacancies in the commission, for the commissioners, and I think 25? 25 for the chairmanship.
And you know, sorry for
no problem.
Those 900, are we going to say that all those 900 are members of Kenya Kwanza? They are Kenyans who applied. So when they look at all those 900 Kenyans who applied, they will be able to find somebody who each political party will be comfortable with, if that is what we are looking for. But let me just say something. The last selection panel that selected the 4, do you know that selection panel was chosen by 2 people? It was President Uhuru and Raila Odinga. President William Ruto then was not involved. But they still selected 4 IEBC commissioners who actually worked until the election day. And nobody, I mean, Kenya Kwanza still went into elections trusting that they will give them the best. Somehow they actually gave them because they are in power, but they were not the ones who selected the selection panel that was there. They were not even involved. The President Ruto was not asked to give a member or a person into that selection panel. So I think we just need to look at ourselves and say we are all Kenyans. Let us support each other. Unless someone has serious integrity issues or character problems that can make Kenyans question, then that bad seed can be removed if there is reason. And let's support each other because we are Kenyans.
All right.
Sorry for taking your time.
Professor Mitula, and I'll come to you, Maria, with the question on the selection panel. But Professor Mitula, what has been raised by Ogla, which is, and for a lot of us, this was our casual observation, that the 4 commissioners were sympathetic to Raila Odinga, and still he did not win the presidency.
Exactly.
So what is the trouble then with the IEBC?
I think this whole question of trust is very critical because sometimes there are no issues. You know, there are times when there is no issue, but issues are created. I think this is what it is. But if you look at the case of where we find ourselves and what the civil society is saying, you know, it's like the civil society is calling for, you know, our constitution is full of participation. It's participatory approach throughout. It's embedded. So the question is, I wonder whether what their call means that they would want, you know, this to come out of parliament or them to feed into this thinking. Because that could be a model where you don't just leave it to the bipartisan, the two political, the Kwanza and the Azimio, which is parliament, then it is a contest between Azimio and Kwanza. But you also have others feeding in. And you know now when we feed in, we have to also take into consideration that we have already a panel that has already started, you know, working. So I don't think anybody will come and just say that you're on a clean plate. It's a very complex situation. Whether they are going to behave like they're on a clean plate or whether they'll come in like some process has been done. But if you look at it politically, it's likely like to be halted out. It's likely. If Azimio demands, because the problem has been that they are not happy with the panel. And the panel that they are not happy with, arguing that it will influence 2027 elections, is already working. So the first thing to agree on is whether they are beginning on a clean plate or whether they have some cooptation into beginning to look, including civil society, also being requested to feed in. But you wonder what they will be feeding onto. Because when you look at that panel, the bigger share, the two are the bigger share. Yeah, like the Inter-Religious Council has 2, and then the Parliamentary Commission has 2, and then you have one Law Society Parties Liaison Committee has 1. So again, the question is who when is the commission, the 2, who are these 2? You know, we may not know. Maybe those are the issues. Who are the 2 that come to constitute? Which side do they come from? Could they be leaning towards Kwanza, one leading towards Kwanza, one leading towards Azimio? Then when you come to religious, they are religious, inter-religious council, but they are very partisan. In fact, we are praying for them these days to stop being partisan. They should stop being partisan, and that has been really the disaster in Kenya today. And I'm glad that they are beginning. And they've been saying, you know, people like Muheria, they have been calling on this integrity and church to lead the way it should lead. Because otherwise, even the 2, you know, they are being given a larger share and because on the principle that they are supposed to be objective and independent. But they may not. So again, it will be looking at this panel and trying to unearth. And it's very difficult. My sister here has been struggling with this since yesterday, trying to say, let's get people with integrity, people who are able, people who are objective. But how do you get them? Because now we have to unearth this 7 now, the panel that is working now. In the current politics, we will have to unearth who are they. Is it Olive? Is it Winnie? Is it Olga? Do they have a leaning? And if they have a leaning, there will be an issue, even in the discussion going forward. So I think the multi-level I also like. If we go for a clean plate, then we have to have the multi-level stakeholder, multi-level sectoral approach, where you can have a small bipartisan committee, but they should also get a feedback. You know, some levels could be working and feeding them. We don't have to all sit there. Some of us, we don't have to be there, but we can feed in with suggestions, with submissions, and that kind of thing, if they go for a clean plate. If it's not a clean plate, it's going to be a very difficult ball game again.
Okay. Maria, we have a selection panel in place. We have legislation that guided the creation of the selection panel, although Azimio declined to nominate somebody from Parliament, as has been ably presented by Ogla. So what now?
So the issue is representation. It's simple. If you look at the contest here, it is that Azimio on the one side says that they are not represented in that selection panel. It is a Kenya Kwanza affair. Kenya Kwanza says, where you declined, you opted out of the process, so we nominated, live with it. Then you have another issue that even the religious leaders who are supposed to, they are the major stakeholders here, who are supposed to be represented here, part of them are saying that they were not consulted. So the process, in arriving at the two who are representing what is perceived to be the government side, or the ruling government side, is that the process in arriving at those two is what is in contest, okay? Because of the numbers in Parliament. Remember, numbers control the outcome. So it looks like whichever way you slice it, they were always going to lose out. That's why they opted out of the process, because it would not even have made a difference. That is the issue. And when we talk about, in the Commonwealth, we talk about the Latimer House principles, which state that the democracy, expression of the people, the will of the people, must be seen. Yeah? It must not just be written in the books. It must be felt, it must be seen. How is it seen? How is it felt? If you go to, for example, to a BOG, where you're talking about the board of governors for a school, there has to be representation of different sectors within that setup. And if you don't see the representation of, even nowadays people say, hakuna youth hapa, hakuna mama hapa, people have become aware about representation. So it is very important that in this process of the IEBC, which starts with now the selection panel, which will now come up with the commissioners who will preside over the political outcome at the next election. If it is one-sided, what do you think is going to happen? So that process, if it is being questioned now, good. If it's going to be dealt with now, good. What injury do those 900 applicants have to suffer? None. They applied. The outcome is going to be determined by whoever will be arrived at in a fair and equitable manner. And that process must be seen by all to be fair. And which brings me to the question of distrust by the IEBC. If you look at the way the decision of the Supreme Court, when it was being read, the biggest indictment in that judgment was against the IEBC. Why? They presented a very disunified front. They had problems right from the procurement of election material. There was infighting to the point where they could not even agree on the outcome of an election. Yet, this process this is not the first time we're electing people using the IEBC. It's not the first time we're using electronic transmission of results. It's not the first time that they've been constituted in the manner that they were in this last election. We've had elections before. We've had in this country elections being managed from the office of the president. And they used to happen, never mind that it was a one-party state, but elections used to happen, they used to be managed, and there was an outcome. So what is this thing that goes back to the core issue, where even the Mwananchi is suspicious of the outcome? Because now you have, on the one hand, somebody saying, I am the chairman, I am the one who knows the results. And you have, on the other hand, no, as we are not with the chairman, we know what the results are. Then you have what we consider the truth. But that truth is not acceptable to Kenyans, because the body that was given that responsibility, it is supposed to be independent. That body did not have the courage to work together. They did not even have the courage to say, I resign because I do not agree with what is going on here. They presided over an election that led us to the point where actually I salute Kenyans for not going out on the street at that time. Because they said, no, the country is bigger than the rest of us. We will live without outcome. They did. Kenyans lived with that outcome, painful as it was. But now here you have a situation where you're going back to a selection panel that is one-sided, a representation of the civil society that is not representative, even of the religious sector that is not representative, going to preside over who will now sit to decide the outcome of the next general election. That is simply not acceptable.
All right, courage is a word that I've really picked out from Maria's submission. And so, and then there's a question of mistrust, which Ogla says it's not the Kenyans, it's the politicians who mistrust, or was it you, Professor Mitula? It's the politicians who mistrust this commission. So do we consider making it purely politicians? Let them have their way. But if we do that, will politicians then nominate or appoint people with courage, or will they pick people who are a bit malleable? And on the other side, if we are to say, then let us be, because if we are to go that route, then what of the independents? Will this commission, if we allow the political class to have their way and their say and everything, will this commission then deliver results that is truly reflective of the will of the people? We get into that on the other side of this break. Welcome back to AM Live. We're continuing the conversation, but you'll have the opportunity to catch up now. Florence, I asked you a question before we went on the break. Do we leave this process entirely to politicians, or must we defend the independent part of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission?
We can't leave it to the politicians. We have seen every time we leave anything to the politicians, there's grandstanding. This one wants to be on top, this other one wants to be... Like, they hardly agree until Mwananchi speaks. And so for us to get into a process where Wanjiko and everybody else says, okay, I can put a rubber stamp on it, even if I'm not there on the table signing anything. I think we need to follow what the civil society is saying. And I think the civil society listed a lot of people, they forgot women. So I'm here to say women also need to sit on the table. We have seen that when women are on the table, peace comes in and comes in faster. People start listening to the voice of reason. But when men are talking, everybody wants to feel their ego shoots up and we forget why we are discussing in the first place. So for me, it's better off being consultative. We don't have an election tomorrow, and therefore let's make sure that we keep on cleaning. And I know every system, you keep on cleaning the system and eventually it will get better. We've had an election since the 2010 constitution, you know, we've had disputes here and there, but let's keep on building it. Once we notice a problem, let's sort it. But let's be very as consultative as we can so that everybody feels a part and parcel of this process. The way we were consulted with the Constitution, the way we had to go through the whole Bomas process to give our views. So let that also happen in this particular process. So I don't trust politicians alone. I don't, unfortunately. It's just that we vote for them and they are there to make laws and everything else. But that does not mean that we've sold everything to them. Our water and the basin and the sufuria. No, we have to be part of the process as well, so that we also feel that, yes, this is actually something that all Kenyans own. Yes, or a bigger percentage own.
All right. Yeah. I'm going to take us back a little bit. Is the problem the commission? Or is the problem Kenya's political class? Because I look at this serialization of Isaac Hassan's book, and you know, he references, or he gives instances where there was pressure coming from the politicians. I mean, all the way from, can it really be the commission? And I ask this because we've had issues with elections ever since Kivuitu, regardless of who has held that office, be it even the Isaac Hassan I'm referencing. There has always, it seems, what are we not getting right? Is it the commission? Let's start there from that premise. Is it the commission that's the problem, or is it our political class? Ogla.
It's individuals. It's individuals. Let me use a clear example. You are not going to get anybody in Kenya who does not have a political allegiance. It's a lie. Everybody must vote for somebody. So this thing of us saying that we are going to look for independent, unless we ask God to send us angels who will manage the elections, and even those angels could have preference, because, Professor here is teaching in the university. And when you are teaching in the university, professor, or even doctors, let me go for doctors and professors here, lecturers in university. Obviously, in every class, there are students, especially the students who are very aggressive and very passionate about political allegiance. But will you, professor, give marks, lesser marks to one who does not agree with your allegiance? You treat the children equally because you want them to grow to become Kenyan citizens. I know there are doctors who sometimes even end up joining politics, but some of the doctors are actually supporting, even financing. You know, we are Kenyans, supporting politicians. So a doctor could be having a son who is in a political party and all that, or even a spouse. But when a doctor is treating a patient in this country, we have never had, and I know we'll never hear, where a doctor mistreated a patient because that patient belongs to this tribe or to this political party. In fact, during the post-election violence, doctors did not care which ethnic community they came from. They went everywhere and saved the lives of Kenya. What am I saying? What we should be looking for is not a political party representative, because I told you before, all the people that have been in the commission, and by the way, we shouldn't be very harsh on ourselves as Kenyans. The problems we have been having in our electoral system have been a maturing process. They may have been very bad, but we are growing as a country. We should be looking for a person that has the courage that my sister talked about. We should be looking for a people that are inherently confident to do what is right. Whether they are a person that they voted for in the morning, if they vote, did not win or win, we should be looking for a person that is driven by personal discipline to do what is right. A person who really knows, and we should not say that they are not there. There are many people in Kenya, from the political class, from every other sector. We have people who will stand for what is right. They may not, they are Kenyans who will defend what is right, but we should not. One of the things that I want to pray that this time, even as we can talk about a selection panel that is independent and all that, every selection panel, even what we are having a problem now is that Azimio did not send a member, isn't it? So Azimio will send his member. So that person from Azimio who will go to that group will be looking for an Azimio affiliated person to go to IEBC. But when they go to IEBC, I keep repeating, the 4 that came out were literally, like you said yourself, were all of them, you know, Azimio team. But they still did not deliver the presidency to the Azimio team. They only came to make noise the last minute, which was not leadership. What we are looking for, and I thank God for what my sister said, Kenyans actually demonstrated high level of maturity on their own that day. Nobody told them anything, but they sat in their houses and they considered that, let me just die for the sake of Kenya. It was a great maturity. And we should really appreciate ourselves as Kenyans. What we should be looking for is people that are leaders. That IEBC needed to have integrated itself, demonstrate leadership on their own, so that by the time they come out to come and represent, to come and announce for us or pronounce to us what they had been processing for us, it was only a one-week affair or something like that. They should have been jellied together. A leader must be able to nurture and to harness the qualities of the people that they work with, and make sure that they form a team that can work together. I know there is a lot of political interference, but don't we have people in this country who will say to a politician, no, what you are saying is not going to be possible? I mean, you think the politicians will kill you if you tell the politician, no, what you are saying is not possible. I will not be able to do that as a commission. That will not be representing Kenyans. We should be able to find people that are courageous to say no. Yeah, we should be able to look into the people that have the confidence to refuse to be excessively, I know it's impossible in society to refuse to be, but we need to be very careful to look for people that will not allow themselves to be so excessively infiltrated until in the end what they present is not what they do, is what they don't even know. So what is the purpose of you taking a role if you cannot stand for yourself, your own personal integrity, and you come and tell us, oh, you know, it was the other person, it is professor who made a mistake. Did professor kill you so that they do the work and then they resurrected you?
You should be able to stand for yourself and say, no, 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 I cannot agree to that, what you are saying. That's what IEBC Commission should be looking for. So, IEBC, we should be looking for people who are, in fact, I heard somebody, my sister, saying that we do not trust politicians. I sometimes, that is where we really need to help ourselves as Kenyans. We cannot trust them for everything. The same way we cannot trust doctors to do everything, or teachers or anything. Nobody can be whole-roundedly able to do anything. But we must, for heaven's sake, trust ourselves. These politicians are also our sons, our daughters, our brothers. And I say it again in somewhere else. I want to repeat it again. This IEBC is a political process. We need to find people that have political experience, that have some political career of some sort, if there is something like that, that have a relationship with politicians. Because if you bring someone who does not believe in politicians to come and be the arbiter of political process, what will they be doing? They'll be looking at the politicians with a lot of disdain. And when the politician comes to the office, they'll be saying, these are politicians, I'll just do what I need to do. We need someone who empathizes with the politicians, who can enter into the world of a politician and support a politician to become the best leader. I know I've taken a lot of time and we are many here, but let me just say one thing. Last election, looking back, there are many things that we missed that I think the handshake took a lot of the focus of Kenyans. For example, there was no much, we were talking about that with Professor, there was no much civic education in the country in the last election. And nobody considered, because the participation of our constitution means that we need to be involved all the time in the processes. The IEBC that was failed us in the place of involving Kenyans. IEBC should be able to do a lot of civic education before elections, involve those women, involve the youth, involve the society, empower the people to even know how to elect, because the processes make the product. If the processes are faulty, then we wait for the last day of elections to present a candidate that has won. And then after they even announce this candidate, nobody even cares to respect the side that lost. I mean, they are all Kenyans. We need leaders in IEBC that take this position as a responsibility, so that even at the time of announcing that elections, they should have brought in the people that lost and the people that won, and show them the process. If your process is correct, why do you have to hide? Why do you have to want to frustrate another person? So there was a lot of things that we missed in the last election, that if we can correct this time by selecting the right people and the people that will involve the country. The good news about this particular commission is that it will have longer time. It will have like 5 years to prepare for the elections. So if we get a lot of involvement in the country, because there will only be 7 anyway, 7 individuals. But if they work with everybody, we might, I believe, in 2027, we'll have a better election than we have had before, because we are a growing nation.
Okay. And okay, there's something Ogla said. What is the worst they can do to you? Will they kill you?
No.
Possibly. Yes. Possibly. Because, yes, because to me, several cases, and they may not have been resolved up to now, but there was the Msando case, there was the Embakasi returning officer who went missing. If you read the affidavits by Chebukati, for instance, he talked about attempts at abduction. Yes. I mean, even if I was in the commission and the national, what is it called? This council that had like the military and whatever, security council came to me and told me Kenya will ban. I mean, there would be reason for me to pause and consider what are they saying.
So if we are fearing that they'll kill us, are we now saying that whoever then will be selected will just do what is done for the sake of their lives?
No. But it now leads me now to my next question, which is my question now to Professor Winnie Mitula. How do we safeguard then in this environment, right? Because the very troubling revelations from both sides on this one. All commissioners, if you read the affidavits, you think you're watching a movie. Yes. How do we safeguard the commission?
I think it is very complex. It's very the IEBC is very complex. The entity called IEBC is fine. It is us you know, because there is the institution, there is the actors and the players. So you see, when you get people to run the IEBC, because there are so many different forms of electoral process, you know, electoral bodies. You can have the government one, as she was saying. We've had that before when we had Waitetu also, located in Ministry of Local Government, running elections. There was no issue of an independent one. So this independent one is always a response when there is like multipartism, openness, with so many interests coming to play. So what we have to take in mind, the many, many interests that are at play. These very interests, as Olga said very well, they are with us. Even the citizens. So we have our own interest, and the people we put there also have interest, but we are expecting them to be impartial when they step in there, objective, and to work for all of us. When I was reading that serialization, I remember reading about them not voting at one point. You know, they decided not to go and vote, which is a very good thing because they were overseeing elections, so they were not even voting. So we need people who are objective, but at the end of the day, we need to ring fence it. And ring fencing it, if it's independent electoral commission like ours, is about politics, and is about interest, and is about balancing them. So that's why even the way we constitute it, you see us bringing those elements. Otherwise, we go back to either the mixed method, the mixed electoral body, which will then have some oversight kind of, it's like two levels. There will be a level that is implementing election, and then there will be one making policy and also oversighting the other one. But all the same is still drawn from the Kenyan citizen with their own partisanness. So ring fencing will be meaning balancing. I don't think there is really a panacea of saying that we ring fence it like this legally, and then once we do it legally, it will work. And you know, legal is very important, and we'll hear from my colleague here as a lawyer. How can you ring fence it? Because even by the very fact that we have an independent electoral board is a ring fencing. It's not a government one, it's not a we had already ring fenced it. So the further ring fencing is the politics, is the dynamics of ensuring that people are objective, like she says. It's very difficult to get people. I keep saying that I'm not sure that if I've given the chairmanship of IEBC, I'll be good. I am not sure. Because I've seen good people. I've seen good people given good jobs, and they are a mess. So it's like the infiltration, the outside infiltration is very critical, and we need to ring fence that. How much should infiltration be there? Like, for example, during elections, you are at that hall. Surely the law should take charge. Why should people who are not even meant to be at a particular point be at if you read Hassan's case, where you even have agents now sitting with them in the lounge. You read that serialization. How can an agent be sitting with the IEBC body, which is independent, in the lounge taking tea when elections are going on? That should not happen. There must be red lines during that time, because we are all suspicious when we see an agent sitting with Hassan or with, you know, Chebukati. Straight away we know it's partisan. So I think the ring fencing will all still be around the dynamics of, it has to be moderated. It's not total. And my sister must say whether this can be done legally. I don't think so.
It can. It can only.
Okay.
I'll tell you, I'm professor.
Tell me.
You know, in our constitution is a fantastic document. It's a living document. Yet somehow we kill it every single day at every opportunity that we get. I'll start with chapter 6. I'm going to talk about chapter 6, chapter 15, and consequences, legal consequences. Chapter 6 of our constitution, we say all leaders, in fact, all our advertisements today, even if you go to MyGov today here, if there's any advertisement for any job, they will say must be compliant with chapter 6 of the constitution. Yeah? We even say it when we are talking about nomination to political parties. Even when you're nominating, as a party, when you're nominating a candidate to stand in the election. But what happens? What happens, Olive? The fact of the matter is that we have people who have no integrity, who have they are serious failures when you're looking at the marking scheme being chapter 6, being cleared by you know, the courts or whatever other bodies, because at the end of the day, people rush to IEBC and IEBC says, I'm not the one who's responsible for clearing. And it is true. The fact of the matter is you have garbage in, you will have garbage out. That's the first problem. So political parties, the funding of political parties that nominate people who are not compliant with Chapter 6 should actually be stopped. That's the first consequence. That's the first way of ring-fencing it. Have serious consequences. Today, we are still talking about the two-third gender rule in Kenya. Yet, when people were campaigning, there was talk of making sure that we will implement the two-third gender rule by appointing 50-50 in government, by making sure there is equal representation in parliament, even to get that women rep seat that is being fought even today when they're talking about reducing the size of parliament. The first seat that they want to reduce is the women representation. But the fact of the matter is that we are not sincere when it comes to the implementation of the constitution to the letter. If we did that, Chapter 6, a lot of these people you see in parliament and holding office in government would not be sitting there. Why? Because we adhered to the letter and the spirit of the constitution. That is the law. So what is the problem here? The lack of goodwill to actually comply with the provisions of the law, because suddenly it's Olive. Ay, lakini hapana, you don't touch Olive. Let's find a way of protecting her. We must ensure that if we are going to go through the whole hog, we start from the beginning. You have a criminal case against you, go deal with your case. Ensure that you funded the judiciary to be able to deal with that criminal case. Today, we are talking about the case of James Oswago being in court. Today, when was he at the IEBC?
15.
Yeah, the time of Isaac. Isaac is writing about it. But you have a mention of the matter at the EACC were prosecuting him for chicken git. That matter, that dispute has not, matter has not been resolved by the court. So the delay also in investigating, prosecuting, and sentencing, of people who are especially in positions or where they are holding independent office or they are holding political office, that is the first loophole. The second one, go to Chapter 15, Article 248 and 249. They talk about the independence of commissions and independent bodies, such as IEBC. It's listed there, Article 248 and 249. And it goes further to say that they are only subject to the Constitution. Their only fidelity is to the Constitution. They are not subject to control. They are not subject to manipulation. They are not subject to direction by any person or any authority. So that if today I'm the president and you're the IEBC chairman, Olive, and I call you and tell you, Olive, I want you to make sure that I win the election this time around, and you say no to me, you are guaranteed protection by the Constitution. There's no other consequence to you, of course, other than death, which we have seen, happening to people who have worked at the IEBC. But that is a failure. That is a failure by one of the three arms of government to protect and to insulate anybody who works in a commission, anybody who works in an independent body. And finally, consequences. The reason we have these issues coming up every electoral cycle is because there are no consequences. Somebody who was actually found guilty of misappropriating public funds, corruption in the tune of billions, went ahead to contest and won. Somebody who has been accused of murder is sitting in parliament. I'm sure it's not one. Just the other day, an MCA has been allegedly murdered by an MP in Huisero. There are no consequences. We will make sure that you divert attention. Then you'll go and organize a demo. Mtu wetu anafinyiliwa, and huyu akifungwa, you will not get votes. We need to be very sincere as a country that the failure in our institutions is our own doing. It is the lack of political goodwill. It is the lack of understanding the consequences and even being able to live with them. Countries like Japan, China, where you're found guilty of certain crimes, you will either, you know, you will die. Other people even say they have honor deaths where you fall on the sword. That's where the phrase comes from. Because you're so embarrassed and you've disgraced your family in such a manner that you're not fit to be alive. So the blaming of politicians is unfair to one extent, because they are the product of our society. We say, hata kama ameiba ni mtu wetu, acha tumpe kura. And they start as an MCA, they go ahead, they become an MP, they go ahead, they become a senator, they become a governor. Have they stopped being corrupt? But this mtu wetu syndrome will be the bane of this. It is the bane of this country. And that is why we have the problems that we have. That is why we have an institution such as IEBC not being insulated from the influences and direction and control of people in power and authority who have necessarily no authority to even be there in the first place.
Okay. You know, I feel like you've preached, and your constitution is the Bible.
And all the Lord's people say amen.
I agree with Maria here. And also saying, you know, when we go back to now IEBC, because that's what we've been discussing. And I feel like as a woman, I have trust issues with IEBC. I have trust issues with the commission. Of course, the individuals there, that's the ones who direct the commission, because there was an agreement that when party lists come, you look at them and say, do they meet the two-third gender rule? We would not be discussing the two-third gender rule right now, because now we are trying to make sure that it actually happens. And so, like she said, we do not want to implement the Constitution. We do not want even to follow the rules and regulations that we put in place. IEBC had every reason to reject party lists, but they did not. They told some, go back, but still they came back the same way and they did nothing. And so that's why we don't have the number of women that we should have had in Parliament in the first place. Come number two, when it came to nominations now, parties have won, they know you're supposed to give this number of people. Parties had already given lists of who is number one. If we win and we are the winners, this is the number of people we are giving. And they had a list. IEBC had a list. But even when parties brought a different list from the one they had submitted, IEBC did not question. And so I wonder, okay, where is the independence? Because there they were to exercise their independence, and they did not exercise their independence. So while it is made up of individuals, I'm wondering what happens, like the way people ask, what happens when people go to Parliament? Is it that something happens? Do we need to do exercise demons within Parliament so that these people actually do what they're supposed to do? Because what is it that stops you from doing what you're supposed to do? Or is it that I was whispering to her and I'm saying, maybe this job, if like Professor was saying, she doesn't know if she was the chair, if she would do a good job. Me, I think this is a job that gives you a heart attack. I mean, with all these pressures. So you have to ask yourself, is this a cause, you say like Martin Luther, that I'm ready to die for? And so whoever goes there needs to ask themselves, is this a cause I want to? For me, if Kenya is going to be okay by me doing what I need to do, and if I die, let me die, but I still do what I need to do and save this country from perennial arguments every time we have an election. And Kenyans did not fight, yes, but Kenyans still need therapy. We need therapy from the last election. And if things don't go right, especially for in my sufuria and in my cup at home, we still need therapy and we need solutions. So we have a monster here. Let me not call it a monster. We have a commission here that still has struggles with governance issues and ethics to be able to deliver to the mandate that they're supposed to deliver to. Yeah.
All right, so I need to bring the conversation to a close now. I'm just, give me a second. I just wanted us to quickly peruse something that is on the dailies as I say goodbye to my panel this morning and allow them to go about the rest of the day's business. But I just wanted to highlight in the Daily Nation, we have Macharia Gaido, who has penned an opinion piece, and that should be on page 13 of the Daily Nation. And he says it is okay. I'll just zoom out here. the truce is okay, but it cannot be. Here it is. Truce okay, but expand dialogue. It will also be necessary to include participation of a wide array of interest groups that best represent Kenyan society. So he is in agreement with the civil society statement that we shared earlier, and even the editorial cartoon speaks to sensibility, sense and sensibility. Let sense prevail. The two of them are sitting perched on tree branches with saws having sawn through. So let sense prevail. All right, AM Live will end at that point. My name is Olive Burrows, and with me this morning in studio I will start from this side. Florence Machio, she is a women's rights campaigner. Sitting next to her is Mariam Beneka, advocate and treasurer, Commonwealth Lawyers Association of Kenya. Professor Winnie Mitula and Ogla Karani, governance analyst. Thank you so much, ladies, for contributing to this discourse. It does not end today. Even just looking at the star, we'll have, this is a long conversation. I'm looking at the editorial cartoon and I'm seeing is bipartisan. They're asking the question, is bipartisanship another name for said handshake? Hiyo ni siku ingine. See you tomorrow night on NTV Tonight.